course, behind and having their own lives. Um, we believe that it will help residents exit large shelters in the city. We will talk about that. It can be paired up with Job First. Um, and it is a reality these days, but 10 years ago, we had to do some work around that with messaging that not everybody who presents for services in one of our organizations is going to be able to afford an apartment of their own. It's just a reality. We know that. And we had to do a similar shift with Job First, for instance, and pass through jobs at minimum wage, even explaining to people that these are solutions that come now, and now is important. And
Well,
then the
yeah,
person can grow in housing and grow in employment in different ways. In the HuffPost posting, you will see that at one point out of 210 participants in our rapid rehousing program, 80% chose shared housing, sorry, and that it increased affordability by quite a bit, 30 to 50% of the cost to rent a one bedroom, for instance. So that's remarkable by itself. We feel, of course, that with any new idea that would be developed at the city level or beyond, there's, of course, a level of risk that we need to think about. We are also thinking that although we had not opened this to families, we would like to do that at Friendship Place. And at Friendship Place, as some of you may know, we like to start programming organically at a small scale. So we will be doing this with existing resources with the families we serve. For instance, giving to mothers a chance to team up together on an apartment for 1 year, because this is the commitment you're looking at, right? It can be short or long, but it doesn't have to be for the long term. And so a question we have, of course, is because this is an arrangement that is very common in society with people sharing with housemates and roommates, will the system support it and move it to something more scalable, bigger? That's what we're looking at. So we're going to start with the slides.
Well, indeed. I want to thank David Higgins. He has volunteered to record this on his computer and share it with us. Again, we seem to have a number of technical issues. Many of us today don't quite know what it is, but David, I appreciate that. And it looks like someone else is also transcribing it. That'll be helpful. But now we will share our slides, share the slides here. And again, thank you. I dropped in the chat, by the way, the HuffPost article that Jean-Michel referenced. So you should be able to see that. And hopefully you are now successfully seeing
All right.
the,
We are
hold on,
seeing the
what?
slides. So over to slide 2, please, Chris. Thanks.
Unfortunately, I'm not seeing the slides. My machine.
Ah,
Oh my
okay.
goodness. I don't know what's going on here today.
Yeah, well, it's one of those days with technology. We're going to be fine. Um,
Okay.
what can we do?
Okay. So are you looking at the slides right now?
We are.
Okay. I'm going to
Like
do
to
it
move
this
to
way.
slide number 2.
There you have it. Very
Okay,
good.
so again, the definition which bears repeating. A shared household is a place where single adults choose to live together for economic and social reasons. And that's really important to keep both those reasons in mind, right? We're going to see why. Oh, next slide, please. So sharing living space is a valuable resource, right? We know that housing is very expensive in the city and in other cities in the country. So we need to come up with solutions to help people now. It's easier to access. It can be made attractive to landlords. And we decided to market this to landlords in the aftermath, really, of the 2008 crisis, where quite a few landlords in the city were having a hard time renting larger units, houses or apartments. And the way we presented it to them is that if they broke down their units into leases for each bedroom, we could bring people in who might help them meet their financial goal for the unit also. And we, of course, targeted as usual for this smaller private landlords, highlighting the perks of the model. Next slide, please. And so it's a creative way to address the housing crisis, and it's a solution we feel we need, of course, at the city level, as I said earlier, particularly now. And in addition, of course, to the economic perks that I mentioned, there is this social advantage because of the commonality that I mentioned earlier. The past in homelessness, people in a household, for the most part, it doesn't have to be that way, but for the most part, have experienced homelessness. And so it's a solution that adds flexibility to the system. It adds a service option. And, all models are good in the system, and a new service option would be beneficial. Um, Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned earlier, we had to work back in the day with the notion that, there should be an apartment for each person who presented for services, and then quickly realized that this would not be possible because of the scale we were housing people at in those days. So we promoted it as a solution, and it can be a temporary or a more permanent solution, and we're going to see why. Next slide, please. So creating shared households is a task in itself. You need to understand rehab practices. You need to know how to obviously work with community engagement and be successful with landlords, but also with neighbors. And you have to provide a certain level of training to both participants and landlords and make sure that both groups understand the conditions we're talking about. Next slide, please. So, in these situations, there is the highest level of autonomy for the household. We are going to see that the staff, mostly from rapid rehousing programs in this case, offer to bring people as candidates into the household, but all the decisions are made by the household members. And of course, this is an open environment, right? It's a household that is about to develop into one. And so some conversations initially have to take place. People's views on substances, what will happen in the household? Will there be substances or consumed or not? People's views on visitors, particularly overnight visitors or people who may spend nights, here and there in the household or on a more permanent basis. What happens there? And the question in the field is often about the remaining ties with friends who are still in homelessness. So the household has got to decide how it will self-run, if you want, what the conditions, what the rules will be. Staff should be aware of service cycles. Again, this is a lot coming out of rapid rehousing, which is a relatively short service cycle, 8, 9 months, sometimes less. And so, in a household like this, with 4 or 5 members, and we can go up to five, yes, in DC, without a group home license. So, in a household like that, you may have somebody who is just starting their service cycle and being introduced into the household, and then somebody who is in the middle of it. Another person may have graduated even a couple of years ago. And so you have to think about that because it's important, because a service cycle means that resources can be activated directly, and they are often staff resources, and then resources helping people connect to different services they may need in the new neighborhood, and also interaction with landlords, so support with landlords. So you have to think of that and where people are because people have to understand how that works, right? And landlords in particular have to understand that at some point, if somebody has graduated, for instance, if that person doesn't wish for the staff to get in touch with them, then we are not going to do that, obviously. So service modalities, as we say in the field, sometimes are different with each household member. Next slide, please. We need to factor in lifestyles, right? Who are the people in the households and what their lifestyles are? We all know what that means, of course. We need to use a trauma-informed approach. We need to make good matches. And as I said earlier, making sure that people can be successful in this environment, meaning that people don't need additional support like 24-hour staffing, for instance, is really important, right? We want people to do well. We need to anticipate issues, be proactive, And at the same time, again, we need to let household members run their own house. For instance, when you introduce a new candidate, if you're asked to by the household members, you may not be asked to do that. You need to understand that the decision, a vote will be made, and that the person you introduce may or may not become a part of the household. And to anticipate issues is to help people, have proper dynamics in the household. Obviously, training people in problem solving and conflict resolution is important, and making sure that the decision making and communication in the household are sustainable for the long term. So that is a challenge in itself. If again we are talking about people coming out of rapid rehousing, it's a lot on the case manager to be able to foster that kind of environment and make sure that it is sustainable for the long term. Next slide, please. We see landlords as allies, right? Because we need landlords and we help them understand what we're trying to do. We recruit landlords who are receptive, who are open-minded, who have a certain understanding of the population, who want to do the right thing by helping people who have been in homelessness and have a desire to give back. And we had a housing navigator in this model back in the day. Next slide, please. So to avoid stigmatizations, landlords should view participants as tenants, and that's key. At Friendship Place, we put tenants and landlords on equal footing, and we also don't believe that the organization belongs between the landlord and the tenant, because we want to give the tenant a chance to grow in that area, and we're going to see how we do that. But it is really important to let people work out their own issues as much as possible and not simply to quickly pick up the phone to try to get staff support. To give things time is important, and to try to have people communicate, again, participants among participants, and then between participants and landlords. If necessary, after graduation, staff can intervene in a flexible model on behalf of a participant if that person, of course, wishes for that to happen. Next slide, please. So the lease obviously is a legal arrangement between a participant, a tenant in this case, and their landlord, and the organization is not at all involved legally, and I can't stress that enough. If you plan to rent a space for people to live in, you are quickly going to see that with volume growing, your administrative staff is going to be burdened. And frankly, again, we are about people getting as self-sufficient as quickly as possible, and we have to give people a chance to have their own leases with landlords. As I said earlier, we don't belong in that relationship. We just belong fostering it, helping it develop. And of course, holding a lease means that you have to face your own responsibilities. It is growth oriented, and the responsibilities, of course, are on both sides. Responsibilities for the landlord, but also the tenants and expectations. Next slide, please. So in this case, the landlord agrees to subdivide the rental unit into individual leases covering each bedroom. The common areas are shared, and some landlords actually, and this is a perk, another perk, agree to have 6 months leases, for instance. So here we want to point out something. Some people choose to go into these households because they really want to have a more communal setting and they don't wish to live alone. But some people really can just pass through these households in 6 months because their ultimate goal is to be on their own. So we understand that the notion of necessity for people presenting for these services is key. And sometimes people accept to go into these households just because it is necessary for them to do that for the time being. But again, this is pass-through leasing. and it can only be 6 months. And that's another a bit of flexibility in this model. Next slide, please. So people need to understand what's in a lease, right? And a lot of people do, and we want to give people credit. If people, most people who present for services have had leases before, and so they understand that what they sign goes and that they have some responsibilities, but also that they can expect certain things from a landlord, like good upkeep and upgrades in the unit, for instance. Um, but for some people who may not have had that experience, maybe, younger folks or people who simply haven't had to rent before, it is really important to go through a lease, and we do that paragraph by paragraph so people understand what they are going into. The lease, again, only covers a bedroom. We've said that already. And we actually supported at one point the landlords by organizing a landlord group that would meet periodically so that they could, get to know one another. It would also help us recruit new landlords. Next slide, please. So we have to be upfront with landlord, and from the beginning, they have to understand the nature of the services we offer in our organizations. They need to understand the service cycle themselves. And that, again, we've said it earlier, there's a time when you can access the staff directly because the participant has allowed for that to happen, right? Never otherwise. And a time when this is not going to work out quite the same way. And if there's a level of frustration with the landlord a couple of years into it, we're going to deal with that more at the system level, if you want, than at an individual level to protect people's rights and confidentiality. But you also have to stress that the organization is not at all guaranteeing the lease or responsible in any way for the building. Next slide, please. So we found that this was very good financially. We've already said it. People have been paying 30 to 50% of the cost of an average one bedroom, but also access to shared housing can be a lot quicker because we're dealing with private landlords who often don't do the same background check, for instance, who may, allow people to move in more quickly for other reasons. The fees are often waived, so that is a good thing by itself. The process is less formal. We're talking about, again, smaller landlords. Background checks are not as in-depth because there's a level of trust the organization develops with the landlord, and the landlord understand that sometimes people have things on their record that came simply because of life experience on the street. We're all aware of that. Shorter leases, we've already said it. And the one of the advantages is that when somebody moves out because the lease is only on their bedroom, the landlord has to cover the rent that is not being paid and has to factor that into their business model, not the participants. And that is good for housing stability for the household because the household is not burdened financially when somebody leaves it by paying additional rent. Next slide, please. So another thing we like to point out is that as the household continue to operate and the members spend more time together, as we said earlier, one of the goals really is for these members to leave the organizations that helped get them into the household behind, because in rehabilitation, it's a good goal, right? We want people to be as self-sufficient and leave places like Friendship Place behind one day. So the notion of family of choice is important in that there is commonality in homelessness, sometimes commonality with psychiatric diagnoses or other forms of recovery. And it's really important to help people envision the fact that years into it, a household like this becomes a family of choice for people who may or may not have ties with their original families. We know that often the ties are broken. Um, In-house relationships are important as people graduate. Obviously, we've talked about that. Um, and members, can develop into that outlook for the long term. So this is a natural resource with tremendous emotional potential as we, have a vision on the field and what services are supposed to produce over the years for people. Next slide, please. So support, obviously, in the community is key. Um, We have already talked about, how this is helpful on the market versus the budget of a traditional household. The flow of candidates is to be considered, obviously, because, there are rotations in these households. And again, the household members make all the decisions in terms of admitting new people into the household. Next slide, please. We've already talked about this. It becomes a burden for your organization to hold too many leases. We know that as a fact. We were holding a lot of leases 20 years ago at Friendship Place, and we don't do that anymore. Um, and building ties with community members obviously is key. We can go to the next slide. We've covered some of this. So this is important. This is community relations, right? And some of us who have worked in residential settings like group home know that we always have to keep the front of the house up to community standards, put the flowers there, make sure that everything is neat and usually above community standards, so to stand out in a positive way. And we're not saying that these households don't need to be good neighbors, right? But it's really important for the staff to know that they don't have to justify the presence of this household in the neighborhood, particularly if it happens to be in a house. And we do get these questions when we were doing a lot of this work around that time. I got a call one day from a community member saying that Friendship Place was opening group homes all over DC. And I explained to him that this simply wasn't the case, right? These were group houses where people chose to live together. So that's an important notion because we know that sometimes, you get stopped by a neighbor who has some concern. And again, we want people to be good neighbors, but they don't have to do anything additional. They just have to do what other neighbors do. And that's also less stigmatizing, right, than the other way around. Next slide, please. Again, we've talked about that earlier. It's really important for landlords to know that in their business model, they need to have made some kind of arrangement to cover vacancies. But again, with this model, vacancies can be very short because we always have a pool of people looking. And so it does work that way. And many times we have found out that when there is a vacancy, the landlord calls and asks us if we have another candidate. And that's because we work well with community members. We understand the landlord's interests, including their financial interests, because we have to have, some level of reality. This is a business transaction, right? These folks need to cover their mortgages and their investments. We know and respect that. And so building good ties with landlord on the basis of mutual understanding is good, and it feels great when you get that call from a landlord asking you if you have another candidate, even sometimes when things haven't quite worked out very well with the person who left, I will say. Next slide, please. So, of course, we need to make sure, because this is rapid rehousing, that people are financially viable, their situation is, after the discharge, right? And we talk a lot in the field about the cliff effect. This, for people who don't know, it's the effect that activates a year, 18 months after discharge from a rapid rehousing program, for instance, and the person hasn't prepared with proper employment, so they fall into homelessness again. And so we strongly suggest for people who don't have any other form of income, like Social Security income, SSDI, for instance, SSI, uh, that these folks get job placement services. And some of you already know about our job first model, where we assume employability and believe that everybody who presents for services can get a job now. And this is, of course, again, everybody who is ready and able to work, right? So we have presented this at other webinars. So the need to increase your income obviously is paramount. And I will say that now I think that it's a general understanding in the field of homeless services across the country that we all need to focus on that. I do wish that more organizations would provide effective job placement services, right? That put people into jobs quickly. And we know we advocate a lot in that direction at the system level. And then next slide, please. So this is a model that we are offering for what it is. And again, as I said earlier, other organizations are doing different things with this, and if it works for them, it's just fine because we do need all models, and there's no judgment on models, right? People should implement them because it works for them and for their clientele, and because that's what their participants are looking for. I do think that more jurisdictions should fund this model because it is going to be a way for us to make it through this budget crisis that we're experiencing, right? And again, the idea you will see in the HuffPost posting was already then 10 years ago to use it in the large shelters where staff would assemble a group of participants, of residents, who would agree to live together just for a year. It's not a long-term commitment to get out of the shelter. And so we do think that this would be very beneficial. And in general, it's really important, I think, because of my background in rehabilitation, I believe that peer relationships is something that we need to recognize more in the field. We're talking about peers on the staff, but what about these peer relationships that happen when we're not around? They're essential because these are relationships that help people manage their lives better and be more happy, frankly, in the community post-discharge. So I think we should look at the value in investing in peer relationships and building these families of choice through shared housing. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Jean-Michel. Very interesting presentation. Lots of interesting information here. But this is the chance for everyone on the call to speak, ask questions. I know we have a lot of service providers on the call here, so I definitely want to hear from all of you. Your thoughts on how this might be implementable across your programs and in your communities. So please, these webinars are always more interesting if they are organically presented. And so, put your questions in the chat here. Um, I guess I can start with one. I mean, do we have a sense right now how many folks we have at Friendship Place who are living in shared housing? What sort of community do we have at the moment?
So we are using the model on the veteran side still, which is really encouraging. And, veterans choose to go into it. For them, it's also the commonality of having served in the armed forces. And, we know about PTSD and how that impacts people's lives. So it's a model that we are still using. Um, I could look up the number of households currently. I really don't have that now. But in this case, also because, Chris, we know that this is a model that we were using in a program that ended, unfortunately, for us, right? Um, we are looking to the future with it. We think that organically we can start with our own resources again to create these matches more often. And the vision is to, as I said earlier, not to use it just with single adults, but to use it also with parents, with families. And I can tell already that there's going to be a bit more of a reservation at that level. I'm already getting some feedback on that. But that's fine. Reservations are fine in the beginning. Any new model, any uh, anticipation of change is going to create some level of, fear, frankly. I do say, though, that, we need to get beyond thinking about fear or fear-based thinking because it keeps us away from where we need to go as a field. So we need to open up our minds and get beyond fear-based thinking if we're going to get to the outcomes we really want. And I'm saying that because I know that there are people listening and that at some point it's going to be very beneficial, we think, to open this up even to families. Again, the commitment is for a year. So if things work out, people can stay together. They don't, people can move on, just like any one of us who has ever had housemates. But for instance, two moms could share um, babysitting while one is at work, the other one could be babysitting. There are some very simple things that can happen. And again, all our models are very simple at Friendship Place, and they are person-centric, and that's important.
What do we think about, thank you. What do we think about multi-generational opportunities here? I mean, you think that, I think the initial thought is people generally within the same age of each other, but there are opportunities there to offer support. But what are your
I think
thoughts?
that would be wonderful. And, somebody recently mentioned that could a young person move in with an older person and help out? Why not? And we already know that many seniors have a hard time uh, keeping their own places these days and choose to share because they retire and are no longer able to compete on the rental market. So there is already a phenomenon in the city of more seniors choosing to share than there were maybe a few decades ago. And so we should look at that also. It's important to follow trends in society as a service provider, as well as what's going on in your field.
No, absolutely. And is there thoughts as to ways to, are there possibilities of formalizing how people can be supportive of each other? That if someone may have some particularly special needs, health needs, is there an opportunity for providing that sort of support amongst each other?
Absolutely, in that peer relation, there really can be some level of support, mentoring, for instance, um, because people, have been through the recovery process. We were talking about the potential benefit of the model for people who have psychiatric diagnosis and, have managed their conditions well enough to live in the community. Um, and so it's important when you've been through one of a program like this to be able to coach other people. And there's a level of comfort that's natural, taking this away from the field and a model. Let's think about what happens in a regular household, whether it's siblings, whether it's friends sharing. There's a level of natural support that is built in when people care about one another and get along. So it's that sort of organic feeling that people can help one another. I think naturally in groups like this, you have some emerging leaders, also some people, that people can go to for decision making if there's a question on certain thing. Um, and so that is the culture that you want to help develop in a household like this.
Thank you. Bob Adler, I see you have your hand up. And again, please, other folks do jump in here. This is great if it's lots of information sharing and question raising. So, Bob,
Yeah, can you hear me?
we can
Yes.
indeed.
This is probably an unfair question, but if all impediments to a program like this were removed tomorrow in the District of Columbia, do you have any sense of how many people, of what demand for shelter would be met that's not now being met for how many people?
It's hard to put a number on
Sure,
that, right? But I think we would see a lot of interest. And the vision, we again would be to locate staff in shelters, right? And for the city, obviously, to fund that. And at this stage, and I want to highlight the great partnership we have with the Department of Human Services, with the Community Partnership for the Prevention of Homelessness. We truly are partners, and we really value the relationship. Uh, but
good.
at this point, DHS was not able to put shared housing in its
Sure.
budget really at the scale that's needed, we believe, at the city level. It is piloting a very small program for youth. But Bob, there are so many people in shelters that it's hard to put a number. But
Right.
I would say you've seen that at one point years ago, we served 210 people. We could have served more if we had more funding. People kept coming to us.
Just as a follow-up, I assume there are people waiting online for shelter now, waiting for housing.
There are wait lists, yes.
What's the size of that wait list? I'm thinking of, is that the potential market for this? Any sense of the size of the wait list?
Well, people waiting for vouchers are in the thousands, right? I mean, it's a crisis.
All right.
And even though the wait list was closed several years ago and reopened, it's a real it's a crisis situation because of the
Yeah.
cost of housing. But again, you know what, you make a great point. People who are on these wait lists, for instance, for the Aston short-term housing for singles, for E Street, the
Right.
same. Uh, or frankly, if the city got to that, families waiting for the Brooks, for instance, could be engaged and could be offered another solution.
And the cost per participant would be less.
A lot less,
Yeah.
yes. And so that's what we call in the field sort of diversion. Instead of entering the system for, formal services, residential and otherwise supportive services, so case management, you are diverted from entering the system. And more these days, the field is really concerned with doing that effectively because it's really important. Years ago, people would say that prevention didn't give you a bang for your buck. We were already doing prevention at Friendship Place because we thought it was the humane thing, the right thing to do. So looking ahead before people enter the system and trying to divert them in different ways, and this would be one, we feel would be very beneficial.
Thank you. Lynn, I see your hand up, and then Catherine Lumen had a question in the chat, but Lynn, you might be adding on to the current conversation. So,
Sure. Yes, actually, I think a little bit of what Bob touched on. We mentioned two things. One was the idea of, perhaps, five people who were currently coexisting in a shelter being able to access that. Can you were talking about the cost to the city. So how would, and also I know Bob just mentioned sort of like a cost per participant issue in terms of what the city would need to fund, like what kinds of things, would it just be a different kind of casework that they would be providing, or, I don't know, some sort of a online format to match people or something? Like, what is it that you envision
Yes,
the
well,
how that would work?
it could be done more through the existing rapid rehousing programs, right? And some providers are doing it in the city, are doing shared housing. So out of these programs could be, one of the places where it can be done. But we envision, yes, a new type of service where case managers would actually work on assembling households with people who get along, who know one another, who trust one another, who have some level of income already, hopefully. But if they don't, who might receive support from job placement services. And so this is really a new program that we need, we feel, to be effective. But again, because of, the way we work at Friendship Place, we are going to organically start the process again. And we have been, as I mentioned, doing it anyway, but we're going to sort of increase activity in that direction. So, yes, some decision would have to be made at the city level that this is a viable program and it's worth investing in. I think that from a financial perspective, it's an excellent, would be an excellent choice because it is very cost effective, and we have to think of that in the field. It's effective and cost effective and person centric and allows people to become self sufficient as quickly as possible and just be one of many, many households in the city. And that's what we want.
thank you. We have two good questions in the chat. Catherine, you came up first, so I'll ask yours. When a participant leaves a household and the remaining participants are asked to vote on whether a new candidate can join them, how does good faith play into that? What's the disincentive for rejecting new people so you have fewer people sharing the common areas? How do you move that forward?
Well, and I encourage everybody on the call who has ever lived in a shared situation and had to vote on a housemate to reflect on that. Uh, there is always a level of subjectivity, right, in choices. And so, but in good faith, and if you have built a good culture for the house, through basic training of the members and some values highlighted, I think you can do a lot in that direction. So there's a good level of fairness in these choices. And, if somebody is deemed just not as a good candidate because their habits are different, their schedules are different, um, after all, it's best for them to try another household, right? I think.
Mhm. Very good. Thank you. Umi, you asked two questions in the chat. Let's take the first one. What happens at holiday time? Say a family wants to host, or one of the household members wants to host family members, but they're in shared housing. How do you balance guests and things like that? Well, I guess even
Well,
beyond holiday season. I mean, how do you balance guests coming in?
how do you balance guests all through the year? We talked about that earlier. It's really important to have some basic rules in the house. Can somebody spend the night on the couch? Can people spend the night in a bedroom with another resident, for instance?
Hmm.
How often does this happen? When is the time frame when this looks a lot like a new resident, and that
Mm.
person might need to be, sharing the lease and be more official? Because again, people maintain ties with friends they knew in the period of homelessness. And of course, people want to welcome their friends into their houses, especially when it gets cold or too hot, and they're concerned about that. So that's one area. For entertainment, it's, of course, what, any family would do really is we're hosting a so and so, or I'd like to host so and so, and what do you think? Do you want to be a part of it, or will you be going out that day? And let's talk about it. I think that's pretty simple. The other conversation is, I think, the one on substances. What goes on in this house? Are people consuming substances? You have to, talk
Mm.
about that. It's really important. What are people going to do, and what is the level of tolerance, or even for cigarette smoking, where does that happen, right? 25 feet from the building, or,
Hmm.
because you want everybody to be happy, but with with a focus on reality and on the fact that this is real life. So let's talk about everything. You can do a lot to help people.
Gotcha. A follow-up question about talking about what responsibilities and shared discussions. Are pets allowed? Not talking about service animals, but just I have a cat or a dog. How does that work?
Absolutely, and that's a good thing. You know how many people have a hard time accessing shelter because they have a dog. So,
Mhm.
if landlords allow pets and the household members like pets around, I think that's a great thing. We all know that, pets are often therapeutic for us, right? They bring a level of comfort, and so that's a very good thing, I think. And again, household members decide.
Right. All part of the conversation, all part of that.
Indeed.
And you stressed communication skills. That seems like that's the overarching theme throughout is,
It's
how do you
really
resolve
important.
conflict?
Indeed, yes, yes. And also
Absolutely.
recognize that, at some point it may be a time to move because you're no longer compatible with your household members, and maybe you're able to afford your own place. Maybe you realize that was your ultimate goal, and that's all right too, knowing when the time to go has come, I think is a good thing to talk about.
Thank you. Reginald, you asked the question, do you anticipate people choosing shared housing as a first option? I assume most people would like to live on their own to reduce conflict, but how do you? Um, well, let's ask the first half of that question first. I mean, do you anticipate people would choose shared housing as their first option?
So again, 80% of 210 participants back in the day chose shared housing for
Hmm.
affordability reasons, of course, but also for social perks because they didn't want to live alone. Uh,
Hmm.
for some people, again, and it's a good question, it is a necessity. It's a financial necessity, and they really do wish that they could have their own place. And we can help people get to that through, for instance, these shorter leases of 6 months or a year's lease, and then helping the person prepare for their own apartments because they got a better job or, they're more able to do that financially. So it's a bit of both. Um, but sometimes it is necessity and, it's a fact of life that sometimes we have to do things that we may not prefer to do, but we have to do for a while.
Cool. Reginald, the second half of your question was how do you manage internal conflict while clients are partaking? And Jean-Michel, it sounds like from your earlier discussion that it really is just that conversation, ongoing conversation, and that there is a role sometimes for the service provider to step in and offer conflict management skills. But in general, it becomes like in any household that need to share one
Absolutely.
space.
And when the service provider, when the case manager is in the house, for that person to really think of their role. They are not managing the house. They probably will not run the house meeting. A household member should run the house meeting if there's one, right? And never give an impression that somehow this household is staffed. It is not staffed. The
Key.
person who is asked to come in for conflict resolution needs to understand that they're simply there to facilitate things.
It's a one-off and not an
A
ongoing sort of
one-off. And
relationship.
again, we want this model to be as light touch as possible on service providers. That's a goal. Because if to bring it to scale, Bob was saying how many people, it will be hundreds of people a year if as we develop this. So you want to make this as light touch as possible on the organization because of manageability, because of limited resources within the organizations, and because we want to make it attractive to service providers, right? And not have some kind of fear that, there will be legal implications or things will get very complicated. A model should be as simple as possible.
Very good. The question, someone asked a question in the chat. Is it possible for us to share this deck afterwards? Jean-Michel, I assume that that's okay.
Absolutely. Yes, yes.
Very good. Thank you. Ben, you asked, how does this model, and first of all, it was a very nice compliment. Thank you, Ben. But you asked in your question, how does this work related to DC zoning code in terms of the number of unrelated individuals in a single
So
family home?
you can be a group home. You have to be a group home, a licensed group home in DC with 6 people. At five, up to five, you don't need that. And we know that for a fact at Friendship Place because we opened a house many moons ago and actually tested that rule with the district in the early 90s. Um, and you have a lot of households around Mount Pleasant, for instance, of 3, 4, 5. So that's how that works. And again, because the folks who present for services are coming out of homelessness, it doesn't mean that they don't have the same rights as anybody else out there in the city, right?
Mhm.
And the city and beyond, by the way, right? That's a possibility because nowadays, quite a few people choose to move beyond the city bounds because they need a more affordable places. So that's important to keep in mind too. It's not just for
Thank
DC proper.
Thank you. We're coming up on the hour here. I wanted to note an upcoming event. We have our DC, our Friendship Place Honors Gala on September 17th at the Conrad. I dropped that in the chat earlier. Jean-Michel, as we wrap up, are there closing thoughts you would like to share?
That as a group of providers, because, we have I think those relationships, I think it's really important for us to keep our minds open to look at the potential of the model. Um, I want to thank Teresa Silla for being with us today, Executive Director of the DC Interagency Council on Homelessness, and for, taking an interest in this model. I think through the council, we could, move the model forward also. And Lynn and I have already talked about, what work group might be best suited to do that. So we don't have to create another work group because I know that there are a lot of committees and work groups at the council, having served there myself. And Lynn is a member now for us. So let's, talk about this and see what it would look like. but I think there's a feeling of urgency, and I really wish that something could be done even in FY27, which will start October 1, at a certain scale, and we may be too late for this. Um, but it is in the Homer DC 3.0 plan, and through advocacy, we managed to move this intervention to the top of the list. But from, having done this, we need to get it funded now. So we should put our heads together, as we often do, with people living in homelessness, with volunteers and staff members and advocates, and see what this will look like so we can help so many people become housed again. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jean-Michel. Thank you all for being here. Thank you again, in particular, David Higgins, who recorded for helping us to overcome that technical hiccup at the beginning. It's appreciated. I'll reach out to you on the best way to get that video to us so we can put it up on YouTube. But again, if you have other questions, reach out to Jean-Michel, myself, or anyone, excuse me, anyone else in the Friendship Place community. And I do hope you have a good, cool summer as much as you can getting through these next few days. And again, as you experience the weather out there, think of the people we serve and those who are on the street and the need that they have. And it is this weather like this just makes it even more clear the importance of the work that we're doing. So, thank you for your support in making it happen. And thanks to the other service providers who are also doing this work. So have a good rest of your day, everyone. Take care.